Hello everyone, I'm Jude. I'd like to talk about Part 1, Purposes. There are 4 purposes for Supermax prison, including national system and national stability, punishing criminals, recidivism problems, and ordinary people. The emergence of prison is with the emergence of class. The evolution of prison is also accompanied by the transformation of class needs. The purpose of prison extends is to serve the ruling class, reflecting the will of the ruling class. Therefore, prison is a special phenomenon in class society, an irreconcilable product of class contradictions, and one of the violent machines of the country. The purest intent of supermax prisons around the country is to isolate inmates who through behavior or trait of such behavior like are dangerous or chronically violent have escaped or attempted to escape from a high security correctional facility, or have incited or attempt to incite disruption in a correctional facility. The purpose of keeping prisoners in oversized prisons also includes the protection of other prisoners and staff, as most prisoners at the highest security levels have a history of violence and dangerous behavior. Many people were involved in prison fights, and even some killed other prisoners or staff. In addition to protect prisoners and staff from dangerous prisoners, Supermax prison also enables prisons to have more order and control over problematic prisoners to monitor their actions more closely. Besides, Supermax prison have no windows and no view through the prison, which prevents offenders from recidivism by imposing penalties on them, while at the same time guarding, deterring, and educating other potential offenders in society so that they do not follow the path of crime. Actually, in these high-security prisons, the extent of guns has been better curbed, reducing the ability of prisoners to engage in violence because they are rarely in groups. Some believe that imprisonment should not be cruel and unusual punishment. Others retort that the only way to reduce recidivism and control violence in prisons is to let some prisoners know that violence against others will lead to extreme punishment.
In this part, I will introduce the theory of the supermax prisons. The concept of supermax prison can be traced back to the first form of incarceration in the United States, symbolizing the tough criminal justice policy that had been developed in the United States and other countries for the past 30 years. This theory is highly controversial, and its proponents argue that it effectively solved the key prison system problems. Opponents say no, and they argue that the proponents of this theory, especially the prison authority, have done great harm. In fact, from the perspective of dialectical analysis of this theory, it has two sides. First of all, the control time of almost 23 hours a day can reduce the crime rate of prisoners to a certain extent, and it increases the effectiveness of prison management system. The room for key prisoner and criminal are separate, which can avoid the risk of crime and achieve a high level of order. This is one of the main purposes of supermax prison, but it is by no means the only purpose. It is also used to incapacitate people imprisoning them with a range of penalty designed to reduce their chance of committing a crime or having some bad behavior. However, prison with an effective management system and concept, which relies on effective deterrence and strong management, is not enough. Some conclusion can be drawn from analysis about the mental impact of supermax prison on prisoner. However, this kind of high-intensity management mode is bound to be accompanied by very large financial human consumption. In part, this requires strong financial support and flexible staffing by prison officials. Based on the principle of security and human rights, prison administrator and collector have to ensure that the prison system is very orderly while ensuring the reasonable needs of prisoners. Many experts are interested in this theory because it provides an opportunity to investigate how supermax prisons help maintain order. There are no actual data or standards on what kind of inmates should live in such cells or prison, and there are no clear results on how such conditions affect inmates. While report on many websites or newspaper and magazines shows that the theory had many negative effects when put into practice, one of the most important things is that it has a negative psychological effect on the prisoners. The tighter the prison environment is, the more money is needed to build it. If there is an orderly management, more people will work for it. The prison is not a charity, and it is run with causes and benefits in mind. Therefore, the theory of supermax prisons has come feasibility only from the perspective of maintaining order. However, in order to make practical use of real prisons for management and operation, the leaders need to consider the cost benefits and various potential risks. The theory of supermax prison can reflect the standardization and system of prison management to the greatest extent, and it can reduce the possibility of crime and reduce the risk of crime in the most severe way through the actual life control and spiritual patch. Make the prisoner living in the prison feel authority and awe. It will undoubtedly be a good assistant to correctional officers in this respect. On the other hand, supermax prison means that the manager will spend more time to build and manage average prisons, and they need more guards to get the best result. In addition, this very oppressive living environment can have a negative psychological and spiritual impact on prisoners, which seems inhumane.
The specific definition of supermax prison remains uncertain. According to the National Institute of Corrections, a supermax prison is defined as a standalone unit or part of another facility and designated for violent or disrupted inmates. It typically involves up to 23 hours per day, single-cell confinement for an indefinite period of time. Inmates in supermax housing have minimal contact with staffs and other inmates. Lina Kruki and Nova Morris argue that this broad definition failed to indicate the kinds of regimes supermax prison typically maintain, and different jurisdictions classify prison as supermax inconsistently. In their research, they characterize supermax prison with 4 features. First, assignment to a supermax prison is long-term, indefinite, and potentially for the rest of the prisoner's life. That is to say, confinement in supermax prison is much longer than the regular prison. Second, administrative admission and transfer criteria and procedures typically allow wide discretion to the prison authorities. Other than that, supermax administrator and correctional officers have ample authority to punish and manage inmates. Third, many supermax prisons maintain regimes characterized by nearly complete isolation and deprivation of environmental stimuli. The physical environment is a combination of concrete and steels, cells made like windows, Steel cell door prohibit any view inside the facility, and the design of exercise yards prohibit any view outside the facility. What's worse, communications with outsiders is minimal to none. The last feature can be described as scan or no program activities. In Supermax prison, few opportunities are provided for recreation, education, substance abuse programs, or other activities generally considered healthy and rehabilitative at other prisons. After elaborating the characteristics, let's turn our focus on the practice of Supermax prisons all over the world. The United States Penitentiary Alcatraz Island, opened in 1934, has been considered a prototype and early standard for a Supermax prison. Alcatraz was used to hold prisoners who continually caused trouble at other federal prisons. Faced with high maintenance costs and a poor reputation, Alcatraz closed in 1963. Prior to 1984, when Supermax prisons began to proliferate, only one prison in the U.S. met Supermax standards, which is the Federal Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. By 1999, the United States contained at least 57 Supermax facilities spread across 30 to 34 states. In recent years, a number of states have downgraded their Supermax prisons. Kattingale, built inside the Long Bay Correctional Center in Sydney, was the early form of Supermax-style prison unit appeared in Australia in 1975. With 40% cells having electronically operated doors, surveillance cameras, and no windows, Kattingale was described as electronic zone by the inmates. It was closed down 2 years later over human rights concerns. Goulburn Correctional Centre, opened in September of 2001, is an Australian super-maximum security prison for some of the nation's most dangerous murderers, gang rapists, and terrorists. This was the first such facility in Australia and makes the centre the highest security prison in Australia. Penitentiary of Rehabilitation Center of Taubaté, also known as Piranhao, was established to house the most violent inmates of the region by the state government in 1985. At Taubaté, inmates spend 23 hours of a day in solitary confinement and spend 30 minutes a day with a small group of 7 to 10 inmates. However, it has grown increasingly notorious for containing some of the most violent prisoners, for repeated prison riots, and for being the place where the premier commando the capital criminal gang originated. Her Majesty Prison Wakefield, operated by Her Majesty's Prison Service, is the largest high-security prison in the United Kingdom. This prison holds approximately 600 of Britain's most dangerous people, and therefore it has been nicknamed the Monster Mansion. Her Majesty's Prison Wakefield offers a range of activities for inmates, including charity work, class in industrial cleaning, and a Braille shop where offenders convert books to Braille. A prison inspection in 2018 found that Wakefield Prison was on the whole calm, secure, decent, and well-managed.
Let's move on to Part 4, which divides effect into controversies and benefits. Supermax prisons operate differently from ordinary prisons, and most studies show that Supermax inmates are often offenders of violent crimes or mentally disturbed offenders, which makes this kind of prison mode to the trend of more regular development. Supermax prisons is being updated with social and economic changes, using a combination of architecture and modern technology to protect the security of correctional staff and prisoners. In practice over the years, Supermax prisons have also been controversial. Firstly, the administrative mechanism of a Supermax prison is too strict, which is one of the best reasons that it is controversial. Some scholars even think that it may violate the Constitution. according to the UN's 1994 United Nations Convention Against Torture. Prison officials can only place prisoners in isolation, confinement, and protective custody under the convention. But the actual situation inside supermax prisons is much more complicated. Torture of prisoners by correctional officers is common and hidden, especially when it comes to segregation. More specifically, the duration of assignments to supermax may be long or even indefinite, which means that prisoners are held in supermax prisons for the rest of their lives. When they do not get along well with other administrators, then the suffering of the prisoners may be indefinite. Secondly, the prison administration has broad discussion over the criteria and the procedures for the administrative admission and the transfer of prisoners. The proper use of discussion can make administrative procedures more flexible and efficient. But when the discussion is not properly used, would do serious harm to the prisoners, even threaten the integrity of the law. Every coin has its pros and cons. In the case of gang crime, prison officials need to ask inmates for information about other members and their involvement in the crime. Based on the general relationship between correctional officers and the inmates, the relationship between the two parties is sometimes interpreted as a unilateral reluctance to comply because of the system, the difficulty of extracting information from the prisoner about other members, and even if the circumstances of the crime were known. Prison officials are also at high risk of reprisals and threats from gang members. Third, many supermax prisons remain in complete isolation and deprive simulations of opportunity to readapt to the social environment. The strong architectural style suggests that the prison is airtight, and that most cells have no windows to prevent clever inmates from escaping. Strong steel doors are used to limit the interaction between correctional officers and the inmates. A single stretch of site design did not allow prisoners to be outdoors, so they were locked in their cells almost all the time. Given the fact that the majority of prisoners receive heavier prison sentences, the prison administration mechanism does not give prisoners the opportunity to readapt to the social environment. Many supermax prisons did not provide vocational training or regular activities outside the prison to promote the physical and the mental development of prisoners. This is not conducive to mental health, correction, and the rehabilitation of prisoners. Fourth, supermax prisons' daily management mode is too unitary and impersonal. Only media such as videos for inmates to watch, and there is also a lack of dissemination of legal awareness among prisoners, and the provision of useful reading materials. It requires more isolation, discipline, and surveillance than any other prison. Depending on the inmate's state of punishment and his or her behavior, the supermax prison staff will arrange the number and the duration of visits. As prisoners spend more and more time in a cell, both the frequency and the duration of the visits will increase. Unless you have a special visitor, such as a lawyer, who has access to meetings and communications, the only other communication is in front of the glass. Supermax prisons have the potential to increase the level of violence within the prison population. Studies have shown that it is not uncommon for prison officers to use coercive control strategy to escalate violence. The relationship between correctional officers and the prisoners has developed invisible and often hostile. with officers acting quickly when they perceive that a prisoner's behavior is not up to code. Prisoners may also gang up on police officers, threatening them with weapons that cause injury. Fifthly, the cost of the supermax prison is also questioned to be too high. The cost of this prison mode is often higher than that of the traditional prison mode. Supermax prisons also use effective supervision and reform measures to prevent recidivism. Almost all the methods of rehabilitation have nothing to do with supermax and do not give inmates a chance to truly transform themselves. It is more accurate to accept that the cost is not proportional to the rehabilitation situation. Only 4.8% of prisoners are able to reintegrate into society through this person. Finally, there is the issue of long-term mentally ill prisoners and their subsequent treatment. Recent studies have shown that a large proportion of inmates suffer from chronic mental illness, which can lead to violent behavior in supermax prisons and make it difficult to adapt to prison life. It may also be exacerbated by the lack of proper treatment in prisons. Normal prisoners who have spent so much time in prisons may also have mental health problems due to stress. This requires the prison administration to be able to strengthen the investigation and the understanding of the mental state of prisoners, timely treatment, and the counseling for the occurrence of mental diseases or abnormalities, and the early intervention in the psychological problems of prisoners, in order to effectively avoid the stress or pre-existing mental illness to further worsen the serious consequences.
Although there are many controversies in supermax prison up to now, as mentioned above, because supermax prison is too strict to deprive the opportunity of rebirth and too low in humanization, supermax prison cannot gain the consent of the society, but supermax still has its advantages. Firstly, supermax is extremely safe compared to normal prisons. Supermax is generally a separate unit with minimal contact between inmates and staff, and little or no interaction between inmates and the outside world. Normally, supermax prison only allow prisoners to leave the cell for 1 hour per day, and the prisoner actions are always monitored by the guards. Supermax prison equipment is simple, and the walls of the cell have sound insulation to prevent communication between prisoners. At the same time, the opportunity for prisoners to entertain are reduced, which increase isolation and security. Secondly, supermax prison is extremely orderly, which makes supermax prison better prevent prisoners from escaping. Supermax prison has powerful administration, and manager and correction officer have sufficient power to punish and manage prisoners without the need for external review or prisoner grievance system. Most prisoners are under the control of special administrative measures to prevent the transmission of confidential information that may endanger national security or other information that may lead to the act of violence and terrorism. Thirdly, from the perspective of the sentence and violence, providing a good venue for the centralized treatment of heavy prisoners is conducive to unified supervision. Supermax prison is usually designed as a violence or destructive prisoner, once transferred to a super prison. Prisoners tend to stay here for several years or indefinitely. This has a unified management role for the management of violence or destructive prisoners. Fourthly, the effective classification of prisoners can to some extent protect those prisoners with shorter sentences from bullying and beatings. Supermax prisons is generally designed for violence or destructive prisoners, which distinguish between serious prisoners and ordinary prisoners, and is a protection for ordinary prisoners. Usually, the prisoners who are detained in Supermax prisons are guilty of committing serious crimes. These prisoners themselves are violent and aggressive. Compared with the prisoners in Supermax prison, ordinary prisoners are less dangerous. In the same prison, ordinary prisoners are likely to be attacked by prisoners in Supermax prison. That's all for today in introducing the Supermax prison. Thank you for watching.